A few days ago, I got a bunch of comments on my Why Nobody Plays the Egyptian God card video, and they all said very similar things. I'll show a couple of them on the screen, but basically all of them are saying things like, wow, how do you feel now this deck is meta, or wow, this aged poorly, or wow, you must feel stupid, all sorts of stuff along those lines, and I was very confused. You see, as many of you guys know, I don't really talk about the OCG metagame in any of my videos. The most you'll usually see about OCG cards or deck lists in my videos is usually when a new reveal happens that's related to something I like talking about, whether or not that's a new God card support reveal or a new Sacred Beast support reveal. That's pretty much all you'll see in relation to the OCG format on my channel. So when I saw a bunch of comments from people all in the span of a couple hours, I thought, okay, maybe that God card support really was a lot better than I originally thought, because as I've said many times in pretty much every single video that I made about that support, it's cool and I'll definitely pick it up and probably make some silly deck using it, but generally speaking, I don't think it's meta breaking, so I was pretty surprised when I saw those comments. In today's video, I want to take you through where these comments were coming from and also answer 4 questions by the end of the discussion. First, did the Egyptian gods top an OCG event? Pretty simple question. Second, could the Egyptian gods top a TCG event? Obviously implying when they get that new support, are they capable of topping a TCG event? Third, are the Egyptian gods meta in the OCG right now? And right now means June 2020, because this answer may change in the future, but I'm not so sure about that. We'll talk about that in a second. And finally, could the Egyptian gods be meta in the TCG when this support hits our format? This video is going to deal a lot also with understanding the context of where a deck list comes from to understand how serious you should take it. So the first question, did a God card deck top in the OCG? The answer is yes. A God card deck did get second place at a local shop tournament, and that is very important here. So we are only talking about one deck that got second place at a local tournament. To my knowledge, the OCG format doesn't have nearly as many big tournaments as the TCG format. I don't even know if they have regionals, and I know they only just started doing YCSs, and they were kind of weird. It was like a one-day thing with best of 1 matches. So just in general, whenever you see a top from the OCG, in like 90% of cases, it's just from a local tournament. One thing that I personally was very interested in knowing before making this video was how big of a locals are we talking about here, because sometimes you'll have like 10-person locals, sometimes you'll have like 60-person locals in these OCG reports. So I sent a message to Road of the King, who reports on a lot of different OCG locals, and basically they shared with me that that local tournament only had, get this, 15 participants. So this got second out of 15 players. This is obviously a huge deal and matters a lot for the context of this second place. Even in terms of just focusing on a local top, if this was a 100-person locals or a 60-person locals, that would have been a lot more of a big deal than second place at a 15-person event. This tournament happened on May 31st, 2020. So this happened 1 day after the new God card support was released into the OCG. This isn't a deck that's completely pure. You do have a Hellkey Firebacks engine, you do have a Red Eyes Dragoon engine, but there are enough God card support cards in this deck to, in my opinion, call it an Egyptian God card deck. So the answer to that first question, did the God cards top an OCG event, is absolutely, although it is just a locals. The second question, could the Egyptian gods top a TCG event? And I think the answer here is yes, sure, why not? I mean, any deck, any strategy, any card always has a potential to top an event in some capacity. Now, will this be a locals? Will this be a regionals or a YCS? Who really knows? I think at this point, I'm still a little bit underwhelmed by the Egyptian God card support that we have right now, so I really doubt that it would top anything bigger than a regional qualifier. That being said, it is currently June 2020, so maybe there's even more support or maybe even more metagame shifts by the time we get the support in the TCG that'll suddenly make it a lot better. But at least if it was released right now, I would say that it would have a very tough time against the current top strategies, even at a local tournament, and it certainly would have a really hard time at a regionals or a YCS. The third question was, are the Egyptian gods meta in the OCG? And the reason that this is important to answer is because many of the comments on that video that I mentioned at the beginning of this discussion were saying things like, well, don't you feel stupid now that the god cards are meta in the OCG? Here's the deal. I really had a hard time finding where the god cards actually topped because because they are not topping anywhere else, at least not right now. Now, this support has only been out for a week in the OCG, but we have some resources, namely a website like Road of the King, that lists a lot of the popular decks at OCG locals. On June 10th, 2020, so yesterday, this website posted a report of 40 different decks that were seen play at 10 different tournaments, all between the days of May 30th and June 7th. So in these decks, you would expect, if the God card deck actually was a meta strategy, you would expect it to pop up a lot of times, or maybe even just a few times if it's a rogue deck. Here's the deal. Of the 40 deck lists that they feature in this article that were being successfully ran at many local tournaments in the OCG format, there is not a single, and I really mean this, there's not a single God card deck listed. Now, of course, this is not featuring every single locals in all of the OCG format, but it is a website that consistently features some of the most popular decks over the course of many different weeks and formats. And the fact that there is not a single God card deck featured tells me that this 1 second place does not mean that the Egyptian God card deck is actually meta. Now, where have we seen this before? Well, you might remember a long time ago, a couple years ago, I made a video titled Why Nobody Plays Exodia, the Forbidden One. And one day, just one day after that video was uploaded, an Exodia deck actually won an OTS championship. And I got a lot of really angry and negative comments on that video when that Exodia deck topped that OTS championship. Things very similar to right now. Things where people were saying stuff like, wow, you must feel stupid because Exodia is now a meta deck, or wow, you should take this video down. So what did I do? Well, a week later, I made a video, and in that video, the very first thing that I addressed was that OTS top. And in that video, I pointed out what a lot of people might not have known, which was that OTS tournaments are just local tournaments, and this one top does not suddenly make a deck meta. What I said back then, and what I'll say right now about this God card second place, is that for a deck to be considered a meta strategy, it has to be really, really popular. It has to be really, really successful. Every now and again, we'll see rogue strategies perform well at big tournaments. And that's awesome, by the way. I love it when an underdog deck, a non-meta strategy, is able to just completely wreck a tournament, completely wreck a format, and just catch everyone off guard. I remember back to when Maji got that second place at a YCS, that was a big deal, and then just a few weeks later, it got first place at another YCS, and that was a huge deal. But even with a second and a first place finish at very close together YCSs, Maji was not suddenly considered a meta strategy because the majority of players were not using that deck. Rather, that was a deck that was able to exploit the weaknesses of the actual meta strategies of those formats, and then they were able to beat a lot of people that were unprepared for the matchup. That's not to downplay the success of those players or of that Maji strategy, because that takes a lot of effort and a lot of testing to figure out a deck like Maji and sort of make it in a way that can beat the expected metagame. So what's the answer to that third question? Are the Egyptian God cards meta in the OCG? Well, you can probably tell that the answer right now, at least in June 2020, is no, they are definitely not. Even though the deck got a second place at a local tournament, that doesn't suddenly make it a meta strategy. It's a cool rogue strategy that was able to do pretty well at one locals, and it very well might do good at other locals in the future. But even if it does get a couple of other tops at local tournaments, that's not enough to truly say it is a meta strategy. That's not to say it'll never be a meta strategy. Maybe it'll suddenly be like taking up 30% of all the local tops for like a month or something. That'd be pretty crazy, right? But at least right now, we're not seeing that. That's not to say that the deck list isn't cool or fun or that the top is worthless, because that second place shows at least a little bit that Egyptian gods actually do have some strength, that they do have a reason to play them in some context. That being said, I wouldn't expect Egyptian god decks to be the top tier contenders in the OCG for quite a while. I took a look at many of the other decks that were currently performing quite well in the OCG metagame, and yeah, the god card deck looks like it's going to have an uphill battle. That brings us to our fourth and final question in today's video. Could the Egyptian gods be meta in the TCG? We're of course talking about when this support actually comes out, because obviously they're not very good right now, and the answer is maybe. Who really knows? This support won't come out until September 2020, and the answer sounds uncertain, by the way, because it is, and I've done that on purpose here. There are a lot of sets, a lot of releases between now and then, and there's also going to be a ban list probably, so we really have no idea how strong that god card support will be in the context context of that later format, but we can compare these cards to past releases and current metagame trends and ask ourselves, okay, how strong do these cards seem right now? Now, obviously that OCG deck list used some cards that we don't have in the TCG, but just on paper, these cards just don't seem strong enough to support a meta strategy. Certainly, it can steal some wins, and it'll probably top something because a lot of players, I'm assuming, will be trying out the strategy, but realistically, it's a glass cannon deck that doesn't have a lot of interruptions and gets stopped pretty easily by a lot of other meta strategies. That's not to say it's completely worthless or that no one will ever top with it, but realistically, I do not think, given what we know right now, that this God card support to these 7 cards are actually enough to make the deck a competitively viable strategy. However, maybe we can see it get second place at a locals that we have in the TCG format. That'll be a really big deal. Maybe we can even see it top a regional or get a really crazy top at a YCS. With the information that we have right now, I'm not expecting this God card deck to actually be a meta contender. Anyway, I'm sure I've rambled on way too long in today's video. I think the majority of viewers understand that one second place finish at a locals is not enough to truly say that the God cards are suddenly a top tier contender. That being said, I do hope you learned something about how to research data for Yu-Gi-Oh! And really understand the context of whatever you're looking at. Context is everything. I mean, not just in Yu-Gi-Oh! But in life, but especially in Yu-Gi-Oh! You want to know where the deck was actually successful, how many people were at the tournament, what was the format of the tournament. There's a lot of different variables that can make a deck's topping finish a lot bigger of a deal. Anyway though, thank you guys so much for watching today's discussion video. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.